All right, coming at you all the way live from the lower bottoms of West Oakland. This is Revolution. And today's episode is from a live stream that I did a little while ago with another person that was a guest on the show, Touré Reed and Pascal Robert. And Touré introduced me to Pascal, and it's been a wonderful friendship, and we all kind of agree on a lot of things and have these really great conversations. And I wanted to do a live stream of one of the conversations that we've been talking about, which is kind of like 90s hood cinema. It's definitely something I'm a fan of. It's definitely something I grew up with, but I definitely see the problematic errors in some of it. And Boyz in the Hood being probably the most iconic of all those films. I think it kind of kicked off the genre. Some people may say, I think Juice might have come first. I don't remember off the top of my head, but definitely we break down some tropes and some right-wing tropes in the movie. We definitely play clips, and it was having some issues with the internet. So about 2.5 hours in, we had to cut it, and then there's another part. So if you want to hear part 2, become a patron, and you can hear part 2 to this very fun conversation. And also a year-end wrap-up. I believe we're going to do a live stream with Touré, Pascal, Touré's dad, Adolph Reed Jr., Cedric Johnson is rumored to probably come through, and maybe some more special guests. The live stream is every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. There's links in the description to all those sites. Definitely sign up, subscribe, like, so you can see the live stream every Tuesday night, and you can participate. It's a lot of fun. The more people that participate, the merrier. So have fun. You're in for a ride on this one. This was a great talk, and we had some good back and forth from the people that were in the chat. So thank you very much. If you're a patron, stay tuned for part 2. Hey. Coming at you live all the way from the lower bottoms of West Oakland. This is Revolution live stream. And today I have some very special guests. And apparently people couldn't hear the clip. We had some audio issues with the clip. That sucks. I got to fix that. I'm going to fix that right now, because that clip is kind of sort of what this show is all about, and that is Boyz in the Hood and the 1994 crime bill. Because I did a show recently with Touré, and we got on a little bit of a tangent about these movies in this time frame. And after that show, I went back and I watched Boyz in the Hood. Serendipity struck, and it was on my Netflix. It said Boyz in the Hood in that strong black lead category, right? Because that's where I watch my movies in the wee hours of the morning. And I rewatched Boyz in the Hood, and I was like, man, I knew this movie had some problems, but it slaps you in the face in the first scene with the black on black crime narrative. Like that's the opening scene. 1 in 23 black men are killed, and it's killed in the hands of another black man, and therefore there's no way out other than football. There's a couple things that kind of got to me, and Pascal, I don't know if you feel the same way. First of all, why is Trey super hard as a young kid and he grows up to be oh so soft?
That's a really good question. I never thought about that, but it's really true.
And
he changes his personality and complexion within
everything. And why does he have the worst hairline in the hood? If you're supposed to have the fly job and you dressing like a 30-year-old drug dealer at 17, tucking your t-shirt into your sweatpants, why do you have the worst hairline known to man.
And he can't afford to go to the barbershop. He's got the best job, but his dad has to hook up his fade. What does his dad know about a fade?
His dad, nothing.
His dad was wearing when his dad was his age, he was wearing an afro.
His dad had white people clippers trying to give him a fade in the kitchen.
Exactly.
Dad was his age. He was in Vietnam shot.
Touré, you just sound like Darth Vader possessed your audio.
I thought we fixed it. I thought we fixed that.
Nah. Can you guys hear Touré?
We that's the problem, is that we can hear him because it sounds horrible.
So let me. I'm gonna play more of the gentrification clip because this is we got the audio. Should be working now. Let's get it going.
These folk shooting each other and selling.
We can hear now, right?
Crack rock and shit.
Well, how you think the crack rock gets into the country? We don't own any planes. We don't own no ships. But we are not the people who are flying and floating that shit in here. I know every time you turn on the TV, that's what you see. Black people selling the rock, pushing the rock, pushing the rock. Yeah, I know. But that wasn't a problem as long as it was here. It wasn't a problem until it was in Iowa, and it showed up on Wall Street where there are hardly any black people. Now, if you want to talk about guns, why is it that there's a gun shop on almost every corner in this community?
Why?
Tell you why. For the same reason that there's a liquor store on almost every corner in the black community. Why? They want us to kill ourselves. You go out to Beverly Hills, you don't see that shit. But they want us to kill ourselves. Yeah, the best way you can destroy a people, you take away their ability to reproduce themselves.
Yeah.
Who is it that's dying out here on these streets every night? Y'all.
Yeah.
Young brothers like yourselves.
What am I supposed to do? Fool roll up, try to smoke me? You shoot the motherfucker if he don't kill me first.
You're doing exactly what they want you to do. You have to think, young brother, about your future. Huh?
Damn.
It's like Malcolm Farrakhan, man.
I watched that scene. I went to the movies to see Boys in the Hood, so I watched that scene as a very, very young man. I was probably 14 years old when I saw that, and I felt like, and this is a big reason why I wanted to do this show. I felt like that was the discourse for the 90s. And last night, Touré and I believe it was last night, we're talking also about like Sister Souljah. And if I know a lot of people don't remember, I actually have that clip. We're going to play that a little later. Sister Souljah was on Phil Donahue, to date myself.
I remember that episode.
That was like all of the talk, because this is also during the Bill Clinton election, the 92 election. And there's an interesting exchange between Sister Souljah and Cornel West. I thought it was interesting because Sister Souljah is talking about like these evil white people,
right?
And Cornel West goes, all of them, and she's like, yes, all of them. He's like, none of them, none of your teachers. So I looked up Sister Souljah. I watching that clip, I seriously thought that maybe she was one of these cats that was like, nah, man, I went to JC and I learned all this because somebody took me aside and gave me some knowledgeable books with Kente print on it. And she went to like Rutgers and Cornell. She's pretty well educated. Not that she didn't come off educated in the clip, but I think she's probably been around a few more white people than she led us to believe. And in searching, so Touré also told me that he goes somewhere along there, he's like, Stanley Crouch had said something to her, and I'm over here looking for these Stanley Crouch clips. I can't find it. But again, going deeper down the rabbit hole of 90s political discourse of black shit, I'm reading 1992 LA Times pieces that people are writing about these older dudes that don't like hip hop. Mainly Gerald Horne and Stanley Crouch had a problem with hip hop. They kind of felt it was a bit of a minstrel show. And I saved this quote. This is from Gerald Horne in the LA Times in 1993. When Dr. Dre of NWA lives in Calabasas and Ice-T lives in the Hollywood Hills, it's pretty hard to see them as the militant voices of a fighting generation, says Gerald Horne, chairman of the Black Studies Department at the time at UC Santa Barbara. When Sister Souljah has a press conference complaining about the interest rates on her certificates of deposit, it's pretty hard to relate to her as a Harriet Tubman.
Shots fired. Shout out to Gerald Horne on the CD quote.
I don't know how to hook up captions. God damn it. I'm gonna have to figure it out. So that being said, and watching that clip, so I feel like that's still part of the discourse. And I'm, by the way, I want you guys, if you can't see this shirt, representing all day. Boys in the Hood, shooters. I feel like that's still kind of part of the black discourse. What do you guys think?
I wanted to quote a friend of mine. It's a comrade of mine. His name is Anthony Ware. He's kind of a brother who has radical politics, and he's from me and Touré's generation. Touré and I are 2 years apart. We're a few years older than you are. I was actually towards my end of my college years when Boyz in the Hood and Menace came out, and I'm old enough to have been a contemporary of the original hip hop generation. I had older cousins who were DJs in New York. I'm originally from New York City. In the late 70s, my younger brother was a DJ, my older cousin was a DJ. So, you know, the music and its cultural manifestation of things that I saw come alive in my adolescence to teenage years in New York City. But to quote my friend Anthony Ware, when he talks about the consistent themes of the politics and worldview of this music and these films, is his saying is that this art form demonstrates that Black power succeeded culturally where it failed politically, in that the discourse and the rhetoric about notions of quote unquote racial politics and racial empowerment that became, you know, resplendent during the Black Power era, that one of the ways in that it kind of reifies itself and it maintains its continuum is through hip hop music. And being a child of New York City, it doesn't surprise me that this happens because of the way in which Black nationalism is kind of a part of the cultural ethos of New York City in the late 70s and the 80s as well. Though I will concede, brothers like Cedric and even Touré have argued with me that Chicago by far is more of a Black nationalist bastion than New York City. What I think one aspect of the popular culture that comes around hip hop, particularly when you're talking about that scene about gentrification, that kind of sounds like something you might hear from a combination of, like, you know, the Nation of Islam or KRS-One or Public Enemy, depending on what day of the week it is that the cultural continuity of this kind of combination of Black nationalism, whether it's revolutionary or not, but it's definitely kind of nationalist political discourse, maintains consistent within the music and the message. Now, some people will say, well, that's a good thing, right? But the thing is, though, is that some people would fail to consider what exactly is the ultimate result of that Black nationalist project if it doesn't engage one in criticizing the institutional mechanisms, like maybe capitalism, like maybe deindustrialization, like the effects of neoliberalism on Black life in that area, instead of saying Black people are defective.
Damn. So that actually kind of, watching that clip, that's exactly what I felt. And then going back and even listening to Sister Souljah, so that also sent me down another rabbit hole of watching a Morton Downey Jr. documentary.
Which Jason and I were talking about today. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah. Oh, you sound great. Now.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think, Touré, you have to chime in on this. Tag team.
Oh, we were just talking about, I mean, this isn't that interesting, though, is it? We were talking about watching Morton Downey Jr. for me on Channel 9 out of Secaucus. For Jason, what channel was it for you out there?
Like 24 or something like
Yeah.
that, 23.
And I used to watch it, I guess when I was in high school. And my father gave me shit about it because for me, it was fascinating because I thought it was so over the top. It was like pro wrestling. Nobody could possibly believe this crazy stuff, right? And my pop said, that admonished me to be straightforward about it and told me I was being naive, essentially, but in more colorful language. And when I switched schools and went to high school with a bunch of Morton Downey Jr. fans, I realized that my father was 100% right, that I was naive. People really did believe it. And, that was the original era of making America great again, as episode 2 of Showtime's Reagan documentary, I guess, concludes or nearly concludes with Reagan, making that very statement. But those were crazy times. I mean, just to take it back to what Pascal was talking about, though, with respect to those hood films, and I thought Pascal touched on all the major points, but one of the things that jumped out at me about those films at the time, I think 2 of which I saw in the theater, 3 if we count Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. But I saw then I saw 3. So I saw Colors, which came out when I was in high school, and then I saw Boyz n the Hood in the theater. But the recurring theme of underclass ideology that was driving those narratives, as Pascal said, brushes aside all of the sources of inequality that afflict the hood. It takes them for granted, and instead, all one gets is the self-perpetuating culture of dependency and poverty, right? And those films, I think, really correspond with, or at least take the same kind of framework. They perceive the same kind of framework as you and I talked about before. Jason and Pascal talked about this years ago, that those supposedly anti-Vietnam War films from the 70s and the first half of the 80s that I grew up on that were anything but anti-Vietnam War. They were anti-conscription. That's what they were. But they weren't anti-Vietnam War. And they couldn't be, because those films, those Vietnam War films like The Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, Hamburger Hill, etc., they had a squad's eye view of the war. And the only anti-war theme that pervaded them really was sort of teenage alienation and people in DC not really understanding what's going on, what the real war was about, right, in the jungle. And you can transition seamlessly from those themes that drove those anti-war films, those so-called anti-war films of the 70s and 80s, and apply them to the hood films. It's the same basic problem. And in both cases, you get no sense of what the broader forces are. And in each case, you actually end up with sympathetic views, I guess, maybe, if you're lucky, of the principal characters, at least the stratum of the principal characters. But you walk away with a reactionary lesson. And the reactionary lesson from those Vietnam War films was all the wars that we've been fighting. The military should be, volunteer rather than conscript, more special forces, more specialized weaponry, smart bombing rather than carpet bombing. And but the war was fine. And then, of course, in the hood films, the problem really comes down to underclass themes, which would be the culture of poverty. If people don't know what underclass ideology is, it's essentially an update of the culture of poverty. So what are the fixes? The fixes from the John Singleton films, and I think this actually highlights the trajectory of Trey's hard to soft character, would be to have more Black men raise their sons, and welfare reform, basically. I think those are the fixes that came through in those films.
I definitely felt the Black man raise your son theme which is still a theme. I mean, weren't we just yelling at Bill Cosby about saying that like 8 years ago?
Yeah, but the thing is, though, when you say black men raise your son, besides the mythology of people believing that black men abandoned their family because welfare made them obsolete in the household, no one asked the fact that maybe the reason black men were leaving their families because they were not able to find competitive jobs because there was no more union work in the inner cities that they were living anymore. And, they were basically being rendered to redundant labor because the workforce had no space for them. And not to mention that the only competitive economy that we start to see in the post-civil rights era becomes the heroin trade, which manifests later on into the crack trade and so on and so forth. So we always try to find these kind of short-term solutions for what exactly is causing the lack of presence of black men in the family, but it's never tied to political economy. Instead, we have these reactionary responses where it's like, oh, it was the welfare that took the black men out of the family. And the question then becomes, and then why is it that we're seeing these precipitously increasing rates of single parenthood amongst white folk who are on welfare as well? Mm-hmm. So the problem then becomes that this is not simply a black pathology. This is tied to the political economy in which African Americans are entering American capitalism in the post-civil rights era, where there's no functional mechanism like, the National Labor Relations Board or the expansion of union jobs or the expansion of industrial labor or the expansion of the Work Projects Administration to give them the kind of quality, middle-class lifestyle that was able to, propel large numbers of urban white ethnics into the middle class in disproportionate numbers. And as a result, we start to see the social dislocation that affects black families to a large degree. But again, one of the consequences of these kind of reductionist, kind of black nationalist, kind of black power explanations is that this is something that the man did to us without indicting the way in which capitalism displaced the function of black labor in American society.
Well, let me just add something to what Pascal said, or amplify it. Pascal's last point, I think, was the characterization or the insistence that this is what the man did to us. And as he said in his nicely articulated historical sweep, that what comes through in the film is welfare dependency, right? And that becomes evidence again of the excesses of liberalism, which actually complement the Reagan administration and other conservatives take on critique of the welfare state and the Johnson administration's war on poverty more directly. But of course, from the nationalist perspective, which is what's fueling these films, as racial nationalist perspective, it's not before there was welfare, there was slavery. And oftentimes when Americans think of, and I should say Black Americans, sadly, think of Black American history, it basically comes down to slavery. And most people don't seem to know the difference between slavery and Jim Crow. So those two get collapsed into each other. So slavery, then slavery ends, and then nothing happens in Black life until a tired seamstress refused to give up her seat on the bus, which we know is a myth, right? So, but there's nothing basically between 1865 or 1877, if you're a little more sophisticated, and the middle 1950s. And of course, that paves the way for an exceptionalist account of Black history, which is what Pascal was talking about, that I think is oddly susceptible, is uniquely susceptible to these kind of reactionary frameworks. And actually saying it's susceptible probably gives it too much credit. And oftentimes, it's not simply that narrative, that pat narrative, leaves one vulnerable to charlatans. Oftentimes, what's going on is that, racial nationalists, no matter their race, are conservative. So, look, I would say by definition. So what you get is baked in to these narratives, a disposition to treat societal problems as individual problems, which is the second point that I wanted to amplify that Pascal said. So Pascal had mentioned the kind of short-term solutions that you get here, and I would tease that out just a little bit. The solutions that come through in these films are anti-status. They're all self-help, right? It's all do for self narratives.
Very, very, very bootstrapping. Very, very bootstrapping.
And the gentrification scene, which I didn't get to hear, but I have seen the film in the last
I can replay
18 months. I could probably live the rest of my life being happy not hearing it again.
Not hearing it again.
But I actually do have to watch it again though, but for personal reasons. But the gentrification scene is, lays that out pretty nicely, or Fishburne's line in that. Interestingly enough, John Singleton had an attachment to Larry Fishburne as the didactic voice of reason. Because I know higher learning doesn't fit in this, but Larry Fishburne plays a West Indian professor in higher learning.
Very conservative West Indian.
Absolutely.
What is higher?
Which is with the voice of reason, right? Too, right? He's very conservative. He's the voice of reason. And he did some shit I would never do as a professor, right? If I recall correctly, he called out students who had failed to make their first tuition payment or something. Right? On a kind of like in front of everybody, right? And we don't get that kind of information. I mean, I never got that kind of information. And B, if I did, I wouldn't share it like that, right? But anyway,
You colored people not paying your tuition. Booyaka. I went to the movie theater to see Higher Learning, and I remember even as a kid, like we were all fired up, and anyone that's watching this that remembers going to the theater, there was like different theaters you had to go to where I'm from. And I don't know if you guys are from the same places. Like there's the white theater where you're going to be okay. They might get loud, but you'll be okay. And then there was like the hood theater where people might get fucked up in any black movie that was coming out in the 90s. That was like the hot thing to do. And I felt like it was all over the country too. There was like a lot of stories I would read about where there was outbreaks of violence. And so I remember we went to the good theater to go see Higher Learning, and we all walked out of there kind of disappointed because I think we projected onto that movie and all those movies more than it really was. You know what I mean? Like Boyz in the Hood came out, like you couldn't escape Boyz in the Hood in hip hop press because it was Ice Cube. I can't remember another movie where there was a rapper actor. Colors was I
Colors
Breaking doesn't count.
Ice-T
was Ice-T in Colors? He did the song. Was he in it?
I thought he was, but I haven't seen that one since 1988. Yeah, but that doesn't count.
That doesn't count. Like I think that was the first movie where we have a rapper.
Rico Suave, the Rico Suave dude was in Colors.
Rico Suave was in.
If that counts.
Anyone?
He was in Colors.
No,
he was in Colors.
Do you know what he was in before that?
No.
Anyone? Anyone? Can't Buy Me Love.
Oh,
he was one of the bullies. He was one of the bullies that wore the half shirt and Can't Buy Me Love.
Y'all watching a lot of old bad movies all over again.
Hey, all day. We have long talks about watching shitty films,
especially horror.
I do. I watch bad horror, but I really can get down on some bad 80s cinema. But for this show, I definitely kind of immersed myself back into that time of like, okay, I'm 14. Someone just gave me Stolen Legacy, and see, look how it's fucked up.
Oh man,
right? But I mean, hey, that's that time. And then this young lady started to speak, and she just took up a lot of oxygen for like 2 months. So I'm going to play the Sister Soldier clip because I'd have to play. I won't play the whole thing. I'll save you guys that.
Programs. In all of the programs that I attended, all of the education that I had, college, public, and otherwise, nobody ever told me that I was an African woman.
We can hear?
Nobody ever told me what the history of African people were. Nobody ever told me that America is business, and without business you will have nothing and be nothing. And nobody ever told me how to organize business so that I would be able to develop institutions in my own community. So now the sincerity of all of the programs and all of the education has to be questioned indicted, and convicted, because the bottom line is that America is not and has never tried to produce African adults who are functional, self-sufficient, who understand their politics, their economics, and their relationship to the world politics and the world economics.
American with the NAACP, the Urban League, and the traditional we shall overcome civil rights leaders of the 50s and 60s that have been all but abandoned and ignored by younger people, Sister Souljah included.
I think that the dice are loaded, and that's what's left out of Mr. Brown's piece. See, there was a period of time in this country after Reconstruction where African people owned a lot of land, owned a lot of businesses, and did a lot of things. But what happened was the American government, the Ku Klux Klan, and other organizations organized in smashing that effort. So it's not that we haven't tried to own lands and have not organized businesses. It's that if you are African in America, or in Latin America, or in the Caribbean, or in the continent, you will be hunted no matter what you do, because they do not want us to survive and become self-sufficient. And you can say no, but you haven't lived this life. You haven't lived this life.
And to be happy. I'm talking about that. All right. Now, to paraphrase Senator Bradley of New Jersey, the state from which your piece was.
Senator Bradley gets much right when he talks.
He does, and he, among other things, and he's not claiming to be particularly original with the observation, we can't get there unless we go together. I have a terrible feeling that behind me are some people who do not agree.
Senator Bradley of the all-white United States Senate said we can't get there unless we all go there together. Sorry, none of us are where he is. That's number one. Number two, you're making a moral appeal to a country that doesn't have a moral conscience. The question becomes that when white people feel serious and angry and upset about abortion, they come out in the thousands up to the millions to say, this is what we believe about abortion. Where is the white outcry against white racism that murders African people all around this entire globe? It doesn't exist. So who are these white good people? I want to meet them. I want to see them. A few is not enough.
But that might be all we can get.
No. And guess what? I don't work with all I can get. What I work with is what I have. Listen, you have to have some confidence in the power of African people amongst ourselves to establish a foundation.
We have.
We haven't. We have utter chaos in our cities, and you got
There's
to
no
see
black
that.
institutions we
You
can build?
can have a program. I'm not saying we've built a lot of institutions, and those institutions have not been effective. The majority of millions of African youth in this country are dying mentally, dying spiritually, dying emotionally, dying academically. And you may have a program, Mr. Brown may have a program, but what we got to talk about is an American government that tracks millions of African people who don't go to your program, don't go to Brown's program, millions of African people, not only here, but all around the world. And if we are not honest enough to say who are our friends, who are our enemies, to know what a friend is, to know what an enemy is, we will constantly be trying to get into people's parties, to shake our butts with them, to get them to like us, and that's not the question. The question is, what can we build amongst ourselves to secure ourselves from our enemies so that we will be able to survive into the future?
So that's all I'm gonna play from that, because she's just too hyphy.
Well, I mean, I really want to address this for a lot of reasons. Number one, I really do, because what's fascinating about what Sister Souljah is saying, right, is that it neglects a very important aspect of Black political history, and that is what exactly happened when we tried to do this same thing in 1972. And this is a theme that I text back and forth with Touré all the time, is that I love in 2020 watching Black people talk about Black politics like it's 1972. And when I say 1972, the Gary Convention, the Black Agenda, we need a Black agenda, so and so. What happens when we have those politics is that we actually do get self-determination. Why is the Black political class a different part of Black people? So when I hear people say we need self-determination, we need to control our own politics, we need to control our institutions. So the over 10,000 Black members of the Black political class who have basically been siphoning off Black political energy into the neoliberal agenda for over 45 years, they're not determining are they part of the South or not part of the South? So what is fascinating about this kind of discourse is that all the white people are bad and all the Black people are good, except for the 45 years of having Black political officials help facilitate things like mass incarceration, gentrification, and every other ailment that has affected Black people. And it reduces Black politics into this kind of Manichaean, it's us against the white man, which is just like Black politics in 1972. And what the Black politics of 1972 got us was the advent of the Black political class. And what this type of, race reductionist, as Touré would call it, politics will get us, is what it always gets us. It gets us a political agenda that becomes a wealth transfer to the Black political class and the Black middle class, while the Black poor working class gets ground to powder. As I like to pejoratively call it, it's fatback and biscuits for the Black elite, while the Black masses get ground to dust.
Damn. Should have called the show Fatback and Biscuits. I wish we would have had this conversation. That's like perfect. Touré, do you have something you want to chime in and say, or were you just watching that going, man, I wish I was at that shit? Because what did you think of a young Cornel West just kind of letting her go?
I was amused by that. There were a number of things that were amusing to me about it, but I'd forgotten that Cornel was that young. I mean, it happens to all of us, right? So that was amazing.
50 for like the last 30 years.
Yeah. But anyway, so I was struck by, and I think Pascal had made a veiled reference to this, the line that Sister Soldier ran, which again is completely in step with the voice of reason in Boyz n the Hood, Larry Fishburne's character, that what she had not been taught as a young person was that in America, business is everything. I'm paraphrasing. And without business, you have nothing. And what's interesting about that, in keeping again with what's his face from Boyz n the Hood, Larry Fishburne's character in Boyz n the Hood, but Pascal's point as well about Black self-determination, is that on some level, what Sister Soldier was advocating was Bookerism. I mean, by which I mean Booker T. Washington, with much more militancy. And that's a recurring theme in most of the mainstream Black nationalist movements that would follow Washington from Garvey forward, that it's still basically Bookerism, but with the addendum that white people suck. And that addendum that white people suck matters because it certainly obscures the fundamental conservatism of the Bookerite project, which is obviously, as Sister Soldier says, racial self-determination. But on some level, the racial self-determination project gives white people too much credit. I mean, because it presumes that white people band together in common cause over issues and aren't divided, of course, by political differences and the like, right? I mean, she makes the abortion analogy that white people get together, millions, thousands, whatever, white people get together in support of abortion rights. But she says, where are these well-meaning white people coming together? Why don't they come together in the thousands in defense of Black lives? And of course, what happened? Fast forward to the summer of 2020, but we've seen what it means for white people, well-meaning liberal whites, to come together in defense of Black lives. And those actions are, of course, as much as anything else, often enough symbolic, more symbolic than they are substantive. The main point, though, which is, I mean, because that's just an aside, the contention that Blacks share a common interest. And for her, the corollary is that whites share a common interest. I think any Black person with a large extended family even knows how problematic that framework is. I have a relatively large family and I love all my cousins. I really do. I think they're all great, but we don't all share the same sensibilities of values despite being Black and being relatives, right? The fact of the matter is, again, if you've gone to schools that were predominantly Black, growing up in communities that were predominantly Black, your life experience tells you that Black people don't all share the same interest. And the fact that we don't isn't illustrative of the psychological damage that's inflicted upon us by slavery. It's illustrative of the fact that we're human beings rather than bees. The fact of the matter is there are more Black Americans than there are people in Canada. I think there's like 42 million Blacks in the United States and there's like 38 million Canadians. It should be no surprise that we're heterogeneous and that we, as with respect to our politics, values and assumptions about the world, which militates against the kind of collective project that she puts forth. And I'm going to say this one more time. White people didn't get ahead because they pooled their resources and all shared the same end. As Pascal had alluded to, I think with his initial salvo, the genesis of the expansion of the white middle class of lore is an ode to, the values of the Scots, Irish, Italian Americans, Jews, Polish Americans, et cetera. It's ode to the New Deal welfare state. It's ode to the post-war welfare state and post-war economic growth that Blacks benefited from, but not to the same extent as whites, right? So the centrality of the state, as Pascal said, to the story of group ascendancy is obscured actually by a narrative centered on group ascendancy.
I'd like to interject to digress into a documentary that both Touré and I have been watching, which is the Showtime documentary on Ronald Reagan, which I think is very good. If you could suggest to your,
I love it,
to your audience to watch it. But one of the things that I had texted to Touré that I found fascinating is that Ronald Reagan's adult political career is premised on him basically saying that government is not the solution, government is the problem. But this guy's whole life from his childhood, where his father and brother are getting jobs because of the New Deal, to the fact that his first acting job is doing government films for war propaganda, how his whole early life, as well as the generation of Republican politicians that he represents that spent from the 60s to the post-civil rights era to the advance of neoliberalism in the 80s, arguing against government largesse, from the guys who were the beneficiaries to the GI Bill, like Thomas Sowell, who were the beneficiary of the Fair Housing Act and all that stuff. All of these men were lifted into stable upper middle class quality of life from government largesse, yet they spend their political capital as adults talking about how the government can't work, and they use race politics and Black people as a political kind of piñata to argue particularly as to why that kind of politics cannot be expended. And what is fascinating in terms of tying that into Sister Soldier's kind of bookerism, as Touré so eloquently explains, or self-help kind of nationalism, is that it completely denies the reality that it has been the government and the state going back to the Homestead Act and from the 19th to the 20th century that has always been able to facilitate the growth of the white middle class. Yet for some reason, many of our brothers and sisters who are nationalists or who fetishize Black power believe that Black folks should go it alone and do it on their own, on themselves, because if we don't, we're defective and we're lazy. And that's something that very few people are challenging.
Well, and now, of course, with the aid of Ta-Nehisi Coates, I think many Black nationalists have come to understand the role of the welfare state in a more explicit way anyway, but are drawing not the best lessons, we could say, from it, if not the wrong lessons. By the way, I want to add one other thing to Pascal's observations about Reagan, and we should probably get back to that thing I just said, though. After Reagan, as a young man, as Pascal said, Reagan was a beneficiary of federal largesse. by way of the New Deal and, of course, his wartime propaganda efforts. But what's also no less interesting is that, by the way, comment to the reference, Pascal, your biscuits thing was a hit. Anyway, I just saw that, it made me laugh. Anyway, after that, he was on the dime of rich benefactors too, right after his acting career starts to tank or at least decline a bit. He was the 100% full on. He was like the Max Headroom back before there was a Max Headroom of GE. He was the permanent live-in.
He had the GE house. He had
right. I mean, that's crazy.
State-of-the-art GE house. Yeah.
And he goes from that to, you know, being the guy who is made by the kingmakers, but he's on the kingmakers dime, right? So when he wasn't on the state's dime, he certainly had an acting career that was independent of propaganda. But then he transitions from that to being on the dime of corporate interests, and ultimately makes his wealth as their pitch man. And then, of course, that becomes the basis for his political career. It's really quite fascinating and disturbing if you put all that together.
Well, there's kind of been like a little theme for a lot of these things I've been watching, because I watched Touré actually had mentioned the Reagan thing to me the other day too, Pascal. And then I watched the Reagan thing. I was up late as fuck, real talk. I watched the Reagan thing. I watched the Morton Downey thing. And I'm like, you know, these guys both start out as Democrats, right? Morton Downey Jr. grew up next to the Kennedys. His dad is known as the first recording artist. And for those that don't know who Morton Downey Jr. is, I'm sure there's young people that weren't around when he was only on for like a year.
Predator 2. Don't forget Predator 2.
Was he in Predator 2? He was in Tales from the Crypt. That's the only thing I remember him being in.
That and Predator 2.
He was in Predator 2?
He was.
He was like a cheesy Maury Povich before Maury came around. He was like a talk show host.
He was like worse than that.
Yeah, he was worse than that.
But more, yeah, that's a good. He was the guy that started the fighting on stage.
Yeah.
And go find maybe I'll cue the clip of Al Sharpton getting
Al Sharpton and
Roy Innes, sorry, yeah, Roy Innes fighting the Tawana Barley. Yeah, we don't want to go down that hole, but watching these guys kind of play a role ultimately, and that's how they made their fame. They pretended to be reactionary Republicans to a very disenfranchised populace. And
no, I don't think they pretended. They were reactionary because they didn't want. They believed wholeheartedly that the largesse that they were the beneficiary of should not go, unfortunately, to Black people. A lot of them believed that, or they believed that they didn't want to pay for it if it was going to benefit Black people. Right? In other words, they didn't want to be taxed.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Morton Downey really doubled down on that rhetoric. Like, he was watching that documentary, I was like, dude, he was to the right of Ron Paul. Like, he was so far right, but had such a young audience too. It was really interesting to see. And this is all going on in Reagan's America, or I guess it's towards the end of his last term, but it's still Reagan's America where this is happening. So watching the Reagan documentary, watching all these fucking hood movies, and I feel like they all none of it has any sort of talk at all about anything you guys said, especially when it comes to deindustrialization. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's something I wanted to talk about that I really want us to spend some time on if we can, right?
Yeah.
Is that in the wake of kind of like Sister Soldier's kind of like, racial mau-mauing of the system in that video, talking about, I never got this, I never got anyone to teach me a business, but yet no one talks about the fact that she is a beneficiary of the hyper capitalization of Black popular culture that starts in the 80s that allows her to tour with what would become a multi-million-dollar rap group called Public Enemy. And no one interrogates, well, how much money was she able to facilitate in the utility of capitalism that, you know, existed at that time, being that she didn't seem to have all this tutelage and benefit from this hyper capitalization of Black popular culture. And there seems to be very little interrogation of what was the consequence, right? Politically, socially, and culturally, and the legacy of the hyper capitalization of Black popular culture that starts in the 80s, not only in terms of music and art, but in sports. The rise of the $1 million sports figure, you know, Michael Jordan, the rise, you know, Magic Johnson. You know, there's a certain phenomenon that happens with Black popular cultural production in the 80s, which is a period of massive political retrenchment away from policy that's public goods oriented, and greater emphasis on privatization of resources. But yet at the same time, right, Black popular culture is capitalized in a way that you never saw before. You know, Spike Lee was getting budgets for his movies in the 80s that Black exploitation movies were not getting in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And what exactly, and what I see particularly with the politics that we've evolved in today, with the rise of kind of like, you know, rappers talking about the Black agenda, and Ice Cube, how he's morphed from Doughboy to now being the new Black leader of the day, is that I'm seeing the consequence of that hyper-capitalization that started in my teens and early 20s, and how it continues through the 90s to the aughts to today. And there's no interrogation in terms of not only how that affects Black political thought, but a complete social interrogation in terms of how that affects the way Black people view themselves relative to the rest of society and overall.
Well, and you can add that the place of the larger place of Black culture or Black popular culture on a national platform, probably it would be fair to say dates back to the 70s with disco. Right. And there's an explosion of sitcoms, some of which my parents wouldn't let me watch. Like Baby I'm Back, I couldn't watch, I believe.
Right.
But a host of others, Sanford and Son, which is great. Watch that one all the time. The Jeffersons and all that stuff. And I think given our proximity in age, Pascal, and proximity geographically in the tri-state area, it was my experience when I moved to Connecticut that a lot of my white peers thought they knew Black people from TV, right? I mean, from the TV of the 1970s. And then it's a gentle segue from, you know, Jimmy J.J. Walker, let's say, and Walona in Florida, to, you know, ultimately Run DMC. Right.
Well, you said something very interesting, and let's tie in that rise of Black popular production in the 70s to the Kerner Commission, right? To the Kerner Commission report, because let's not forget, and I wrote a piece about this in Black Agenda Report about Clarence Avant. I talked about how Clarence Avant, who was this kind of race broker for Black entertainers in the 70s, basically comes of age where in the Kerner Commission report after the riots, you know, Johnson issues a study, and he's basically like, well, how do we get these people to stop rioting again? And one of the chapters, he's like, flood them with TV shows, put them more, let's see more of them on TV. Let's see more of them entertaining. As a matter of fact, one of the quotes in the Kerner Commission report is like, let's have shows that demonstrate life in the ghetto, i.e. like Good Times, you know? So this kind of becomes a mechanism of demobilization that I'm not trying to be conspiratorial and say that this motivation continues into the 80s, but the larger point is that those shows proliferate and they become much more kind of fused with, you know, more wealth and more money, and we see more independent productions. And now I think that we've come to a point where Black popular culture is almost like definitive of how people view themselves in a way that I think is, I mean, I think it's always had a role from the 20th century to today, but I think its role is more consistent and more unchallenged in a way that I think is somewhat disturbing.
Well, especially since, just to hammer away at one of your points, or at least the subtext of one of your points, is between the 80s and 2000s, what Black popular culture is going to be, certainly by this point, is Reaganism. basically, right? With splish splash of racial militancy, depending on who you're talking about. But sadly, Reaganism, as I put it to a buddy of mine recently, with ass shaking, right? I mean, because there's so much celebration of accumulation of wealth, right? Of acquisitiveness, with no regard for the public consequences of it. Was it Biggie's Juicy? Remember that? And I remember listening to Biggie's Juicy, which came out, was it 94 or 5 or something like that? Mid 90s. And after I lived in Holly Grove in New Orleans in 1993, and Holly Grove in New Orleans in 1993 was kind of rough. There was an active drug trade in the area, and I often felt kind of funny driving home tipsy, which you should always feel funny driving home tipsy, by the way, which I would never do at this stage in my life, but I certainly did when I was, 22, at 3:00 in the morning in the neighborhood. But anyway, that opens, if I remember correctly, with Biggie telling everybody, the teachers had told him he wouldn't amount to anything. And of course, the people in the neighborhood who called the cops on him when he was slinging just to take care of his family. It opens with that line. I remember thinking when I heard that line, well, I get the fact that you were slinging to take care of your family, but these people are trying to take care of their family too. And if you lived in a community with an active drug trade in that era or this era, there were these drive-bys and the like, where innocent people who weren't in the game were killed, and they had reasonable concerns about their safety. But anyway, the point that I'm making, that is fundamentally that the genre basically sells, much like these hood films, Reaganism to Black people. The hood films sell underclass ideology to Black people. They encourage Black people to see themselves as the problem rather than these issues that Pascal pointed to related to American political economy, like the deindustrialization, the decline of the union movement, public sector retrenchment. And of course, the rap game at a certain point, by the 1990s at the latest, begins to sell Reaganism in the form of entrepreneurialism, right? Because that's what drug dealers are. They're entrepreneurs who operate ideally in a deregulated society where they get to do whatever they want to make that money with no regard for the broader consequences.
So you're saying drug dealers are like the fossil fuel industry? Is that what we're getting at here?
Well, but I mean, you have a better time probably after you buy some drugs and some gas, unless you're buying gas to fill your car up to go to the drug dealer.
With drugs.
There.
I mean, the thing is, though, right? I think, like, for Touré and I, who are clearly like Generation X black men, right, who were like, would be considered the old beards of the Black community, which is probably horrifying to both of us for a variety of reasons, right? It's like, we don't want to turn into that guy. In other words, we don't want to be the cartoonist Stanley Crouch. See, it's that hip hop, damn it, that destroyed a whole generation of Black kids that did.
It's a pretty good impersonation because I had to watch a bunch of his video.
Because
it's only the bad hip hop, though. It's only the bad.
But the thing is, though, like what the consequence of not interrogating how pop culture works in a system to validate a policy and a political economy that is worked on not only disadvantaging all people, but particularly Black people, because we have such a larger percentage of Black people who are in a stage of precarity, allows us to come to a point where we can have critical conversations without being deemed either reactionary or sellout. And I can say, listen, my credentials in terms of the origins of hip hop growing up in Jamaican Queens are not going to be questioned by anyone in terms of understanding, liking the best of the music and understanding what the music is about. But the larger point is that, at a certain point, can we have an intellectual conversation about what exactly this project produces in terms of political and social and economic consequence for the communities that consume this product, or the community or the people who consume it and make judgments about the communities that appear in this product.
Well, and that's the last point you made is key though, right? That the genre has not been a Black art form, I would say, since the genesis of Yo MTV Raps, but which I think was like 87 or 88 or something.
88.
Like that. I mean, so it crossed over when gangster rap was all the rage in the early 1990s. One of the things that disturbed me about the genre is that more than 50% of the consumers of the genre were white kids.
Mm-hmm.
And by this point, I'm in college, surrounded by affluent white kids, many of them, hippies or the precursor to hipsters. And watching them, much like my high school acquaintances, consume that genre with an eye toward getting a window onto the true Black experience, right? Because that's what happened, was sobering for me, because for them, on some level, rap was the minstrel show, or at least I won't say the entirety of the genre, right? The Native Tongue Posse was great, of course, and was popular, it seemed, among a stratum of college kids across racial lines. But gangster rap in particular, for a lot of young people when Pascal and I were young people, for a lot of young white people, I should say, when Pascal and I were young men, was a window onto what they believed to be the authentic Black experience, but it was essentially a minstrel show.
But also, too, don't you feel like I feel like the journalism of that time kept spitting out that narrative that this is the real experience.
Absolutely.
Right here. If you want to know what Black life is, and I think it's worse now. Like I know we don't really know each other, Pascal, but I work in work in music festivals, and I'm a little younger than y'all, but I'm like an old fuddy-duddy, and there's a lot of shit I hate. And usually when I work these music festivals, I'm like yelling at people, put the clothes on and turn the shit down. Like I am that guy. I'm John Witherspoon and House Party at Coachella. But I worked these hip hop ones too, and I worked one called Rolling Loud. And it was a hip hop festival, and it was very, very, what they call them, the mumble rappers. And if you want to talk about a minstrel show, like they weren't hiding it. And then, but if you read the reviews in like Complex Magazine, and I've hung out with writers of Complex Magazine, they don't look like us.
Well, was it Vibe or The Source that was? I think it was Vibe that was founded by two Harvard white, two white Harvard.
Was it The Source?
It was The Source.
It's not Benzino. I thought Benzino founded The Source. No, but I think it's one.
But the thing is, though, I want to interject something important, right? Back to
I
that.
hope it's important.
Journalism.
You're interjecting.
I'm sorry.
Continue.
How about the generation of journalists who are saying that hip hop is a contribution to the Black liberation struggle, trademark Incorporated LLC, if you will.
It's really interesting to be in that world, right? Like in it. I'm in it, backstage, side stage, in it, and you're just like, I can't take any of y'all seriously.
I want to hear Touré speak because I cut him off and I feel bad. He's going to accuse me.
Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad.
I was not speaking.
Don't feel bad at all. I was afraid it was going to be Touré and Cedric. Now it's going to be too many light-skinned people on the internet. I was like, I gotta have a limit of light-skinned people. And when Toré's like, I got a homie, I was like, is he light? I got a paper bag test the people before they get on.
That's bad, bro.
But go ahead and finish, Touré.
I was good. I wasn't even saying anything. It was all Pascal.
No, but I really, I'm glad that we can commiserate about our, positions on hip hop. I mean, I'm just, it's very easy to become dismissed by, the people who are the romanticizers of the genre, who will be like, "Oh, y'all just don't understand the music." I was like, "Nah, bro, no, you ain't gonna rock that. I don't understand the music with me. I was banging this stuff before most of these kids even knew what it was." And or it's like, "Oh, you're just old," or this and that. And I'm not saying, listen, there's lots of hip hop that I like that is very good. It is a legitimate art form. There's no question about it. But I think that
shit.
amongst many people,
There we go.
With the Black Power movement in the 60s and whatnot, who wanted to feel that sense of participation, who really believe. Listen, there's scholarship. You can go in JSTOR. There are articles about this, about the revolutionary nature. I mean, Touré is being coy, but he knows that there is a cottage industry of academics who have been pushing this narrative about hip hop being the revolution for 30 years.
So I just saw, and I'll butcher this, but I just happened upon a GQ cover of Megan Thee Stallion that celebrated Megan Thee Stallion as a champion of female empowerment. And I just could not help but think of Key and Peele. And it's a very specific Key and Peele bit. Was it Lady Majesty or something like that?
It's 5 years ago, I was standing outside of the studio that I've lived in for a while, and I'm finally leaving. And we were talking about rappers, because rappers come in and fucking out. I see rappers so goddamn much. You have no idea how much rap I see. Rented cars I see. Fake jewels I see. The best shit ever. I had to walk into a room to hand somebody something or fix a PA system, and the motherfucker was doing snow angels and money. I've seen the most ridiculous shit you can imagine. And a friend looked over at me and he said, "Doesn't hip hop nowadays look like a Living Color skit from the 90s?" Hurt my soul to laugh, but it does. And what are you going to tell these kids?
But you could see it coming. I mean, I stopped. One of the reasons that I don't feel like an old fuddy-duddy is because I felt like that guy when I was 23 or 24. I mean, I basically stopped listening to lyrics in 1994 and 95, right? It was pretty much done, and enjoyed it most maybe at the club with a shot of tequila and a couple of Heinekens in that era, which I don't drink now. I moved on to Belgian beers. But anyway, so you could see the trajectory that the genre was on, particularly after the crossover. And I don't want to romanticize it when it was mainly something that you just hear on WBLS or whatever in New York. Actually, did BLS play rap?
One of those KTU.
There you go. Yeah.
Hip hop station in New York. Not to regionally exclude you, brother. Just,
That's fine. That's fine. I think, I don't know if we already talked about it on there, but I did a tour with the kids TV show, and Biz Markie was on there.
Okay.
With DJ Cool V, his cousin, and they often had these very, very regional and old school hip hop conversations. Like they got in a fight in catering one day on what was the second rap album.
Oh wow, that's a very good trivia question.
Oh, I still love that man to this day. And
the Last Poets don't count, obviously. So
no, I don't think they'd be.
No, it's interesting. I don't think people look at them as like maybe proto hip hop, like it's like having like a new metal conversation or a punk conversation. Like who's the first punk band? Like I don't know. I don't care.
Well, I mean, the Biz Markie reference I think works for both Pascal and me because unless something's changed, we share favorite all-time favorite MCs, which would be Big Daddy Kane.
No questions asked.
Yeah, they're all still friends, and I definitely got to meet a good number of rappers from my past on that tour because every city somebody would pop up that you didn't know lived there. You're like, oh, where? Mike Jason lives in Rhode Island.
Did you see Biz Markie's performance on the Chris Rock show? This was like 20 years ago, of course, but he did a cover of.
Was he playing himself?
He was the musical act, and he did a cover of Elton John's "Benny and the Jets."
Oh, you mean on the Chris Rock's talk show?
Yes.
Oh shit, that is 20 years ago.
It was brilliant. I am not an Elton John fan, but I am a Biz Markie covers Elton John fan.
Biz Markie had a lot of talent, man. He had some bangers. Biz Markie had some bangers.
That crew.
By the way,
quiet
as kept. Talk about a guy who can DJ a party. He DJed a party when I was in law school. He had the crowd moving. He was not only
well, I know he's really sick, but that's what he did is that every day we would have off, he would fly out somewhere else and DJ a party. So we'd be like, hey, we got a day off. We're all going to go bowling in fucking Canada. And he's like, nah, man, I got to go fly out and do Diana Ross's birthday. And we're like,
yeah, he's actually a very good DJ. Okay.
But thinking that I don't want people listening to this show or watching this thing to think that, I'm going to speak for just myself. I am anti-hip hop. I have my feelings about the genre, and I definitely have my feelings about a lot of people in the genre, and I definitely have some strong feelings about the press of the genre. That's why if there's people that I really, really appreciate, like Davey D, Justin Hunt, who was supposed to say he was going to come on, I don't know what happened to him. I really appreciate what those cats do with hip hop and hip hop journalism. That being said, when I read these reviews of these dudes that just mumble the same shit over and over again, that are definitely on some silly shit, and you would think you were reading the review of like the greatest album in the world that was so poignant. I'm like, this dude just talked about drugs for 35 minutes. That's it.
Well, and the star of the show is like you said, it's not the genre, it's the press of the genre, which takes us back to Pascal's point about a long-standing, going back to some pioneering work 3 decades ago, I would say, and maybe a little more than, the insistence that the genre has revolutionary potential. And the question is, what kind of art form that's packaged for the masses that exists to be sold and of course to be sold to the largest market possible, right? Because you want to profit from it, can have revolutionary potential, let's say for Black people, irrespective of the race of the audience, if what's bringing the masses of Black people down is on some level capitalism, right? So, right, I mean, like, how do you win
with all these capitalists?
That route? Right.
And isn't that what and so to bring it back to the Black political class, is what Pascal hit on so well. We have the Biden administration doing that Democratic thing that they do oh so well, and they got Black people in the cabinet, and we're supposed to be excited about these Black people, and they're just Black capitalists. And I guess there was a pushback to not have people from the finance sector in the cabinet. And I don't know what Black organization came out against that statement. They were like, look, the finance sector is how you niggas get ahead. And we're not going to have y'all calling out the finance sector, even if they are some horrible people in the finance sector that are going to be in the cabinet.
How could you be surprised that an institution that's loaded with 1% capitalists that shares probably the largest wealth disparity with the rest of the country is the bastion of racial diversity in America, and where you go to get the most quality Black labor you need for the service of the federal government? Wouldn't you guys think that's a natural correlation? That of course, it's ridiculous. I mean, what you're finding, right, is that the notion of diversity is being used as a bludgeon against progressives who realize that lobbyists, when they are interfaced with government, work to serve the interests of corporate powers that are not really caring about working people, that are disproportionately Black, that because we have an elite tier of Black who are working as compradors in these corporate spaces, who are acting as benefactors of those corporate forces and not of Black people, that somehow it's racist. And I've heard this statement, it's racist for people who call themselves progressive to fight against having Black lobbyists for telecom corporations working in the Biden administration.
I saw that. And it was an interesting the whole thing was interesting. They called it it was a little clip I saw with like Breonna Joy Gray and a few other people, and they called it woke washing. They said, is the Democratic Party woke washing the cabinet? And I was like, oh, woke washing. That's an interesting term.
No, I mean, this is, I know we're obviously digressing greatly from the original part of the subject, because, this is a target-rich environment where we're talking about the way in which, finance works to demobilize Black people, whether it's popular culture or not.
Yeah.
But, there's a continuum here. These things are not totally distant, right? In terms of, I'm sure, for example, when you go to the Congressional Black Caucus's Negro Prom that they have every fall in September, you're going to be hearing copious rap songs and hip hop music to your images of AT&T and American Express commercials in the background as well. Like, there's a whole kind of continuum here that you're going to find. You're going to, cats getting jiggy with it, to the beat while they giving their business cards out at the next kind of networking function. So all of these things work in a kind of cultural continuum, right? In which no one cares that this stuff is grounding the majority of Black folk to powder, but they're getting their flex on, they're getting their resume on, they're getting their business card hustle on. And, people who interrogate this, if they're not Black, they're called racists, or if they are Black, they're called haters. Jared Ball, who's a great left commentator, he's like, hate harder. His argument is like, hate harder. We need to hate more. There's more reason to hate. And I mean, my larger point is that, talking about these inconsistencies about how race is used by the corporate forces in American society to give cover to an agenda that doesn't work for most Black folk in the name of diversity. I mean, I wrote an article in Black Agenda Report a few years ago about, how thanks to the Congressional Black Caucus, Remy from House of Cards is real. And if you remember the House of Cards, right? Remy is this Black, congressional aide who becomes a lobbyist for this really horrible company named Sandcorp that is like an environmental wasteland who's doing all kinds of horrible toxic stuff. And he works for the guy who was the congressman at the time, who was the evil, antagonist, and he works intimately with him, right? And you're watching House of Cards, you're like, wow, this is an evil guy. There can never be anything real like this. And then there was an article that I had fallen on because of my good friend, rest in peace, Bruce Dixon, that talked about how the Congressional Black Caucus since the 80s had given birth to a whole league of Black lobbyists who had their own organization called some kind of Washington Black Lobbyist Group. And these guys' expertise was lobbying for the same kind of companies that Remy from House of Cards. So it's like, this was like art imitating life. This organization, the Congressional Black Caucus, which comes to life after the Civil Rights Movement, that's supposed to be the moral compass of the Congress, has created this army of Remys from House of Cards who are working for telecoms, the worst capitalist institutions you can think of. And the article that I wrote talks about how these guys were helping the banking industry get the CBC to agree to deregulate Dodd-Frank at the time.
The only Remy I know shot Tyra Banks in hiring.
That was the name of the character?
Yeah.
I didn't remember that.
Michael Rappaport.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Brian Anon had a question a while back, but that I think we might want to segue to.
This one?
Yeah. But to get to that, I want to give Pascal a plug by way of, I think, an article of his that I might have mentioned to you, Jason, in a podcast that I did with you. I mentioned it, if not,
we talked for like 4 hours.
I know, right? So it's hard to say what made. For me, it's hard to
on air. I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember.
But Pascal wrote this article, is how I met him, actually. That was it was a critique of an article that Ta-Nehisi Coates had written, I think in 2013 or something like that. And the Coates article was Beyond the Code of the Streets. That was the name of it. And I happened upon the article late. I had read the article. I'm pretty sure it came out in spring of 2013 or something like that. I read it in the spring of 2015. I was wrapping up an article on the Moynihan Report for a symposium that I had organized and was editing, and I was Googling stuff on the Moynihan Report, and I found some stuff by Coates, and then I couldn't remember that title, so I Googled some more Coates stuff, and I happened upon Beyond the Code of the Streets, and then I happened upon Pascal's critique of it. And when I read Beyond the Code of the Streets, I thought it was horrible. It made my job, I thought it made my job as a Black professional who works with a lot of white liberals who read Ta-Nehisi Coates harder, because that article seemed to validate this wasn't the official intent, but the claims of the article validated the prejudice that I know some white people have about Black people, which is that they presume that within the chest of each Black person beats the heart of a thug, no matter what the credentialing or for that matter, age of the Black person in question. There it is. And that's exactly the case that Coates was making. That technically wasn't exactly his intent to make my job harder or his, but that was the obvious takeaway, which Pascal's article, don't remember the title of it, explored. And it was a cultural tour guide, right?
Ta-Nehisi Coates and the Danger of the Black Cultural Tour Guide.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Damn, you call him the Black Cultural Tour Guide. I'm putting links up. I'm putting links up on the screen. I don't know if you guys can see it. For your Black Agenda Report page.
So I would recommend that we get to Brian's question, if we do get to it, by way of Pascal exploring that article he wrote, which was great.
Yeah, I mean, I basically wrote the article, right? I read that article, Beyond the Code of the Streets, that Coates wrote, and I was horrified by the piece for the same reason. And what horrified me is that Coates doesn't understand why it's racist to believe Black people are magical. And that's his whole shtick. I mean, even if you watch the trailer for his new HBO special about his book, his whole thing is that Black people are magical, they're just special and everything. And what is particularly dangerous about this is that same kind of argumentation has been used by white racists all the time to basically say, well, you can, Black people they have super spidey sense and powers, so we got to deal with them in a certain way because normal stuff doesn't work for them. But to the larger point, in the Code of the Streets, he's basically saying that no matter how much education or pedigree or refinement, whatever you want to say, a Black man has, and I think he particularly says Black men, all of them have this inner Biggie Smalls in them that if you get them in the right way, they're just going to rise up on you and just like punch you in the face. And the thing that I found so comical about this is that Coates either has been so bereft of interacting with people of different races, he didn't realize there's nothing Black about this. This is called hypermasculinity. And if you ever had white friends who were in the Marine Corps, who played football, who were athletes, who were Navy SEALs, who were cops or firemen, you realize they respond the same way. And this isn't some specific sign that Black men are magical Negroes. And for you to say that is not only racist, but you be the same schmuck who will argue why stop and frisk is so racist and horrible, but in the same breath saying, but still, when you get that brother from Harvard, he might shake you. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And if you are, I mean, I think the point that Pascal makes about stop and frisk is the star of the show, but because obviously, as Pascal said, this narrative licenses stop and frisk. It makes it hard to make the case against it if you're going to argue that we've all got an inner thug in us, right? But if you are someone who's a Black person, I think man or woman, who works in a professional setting, the last thing you want to do is be characterized as the angry Black person. And it doesn't take much for you to reach the threshold, right? You don't have to do anything.
But isn't that Coates' whole thing? Like, do you ever look at and I watch Democracy Now! In the morning. I fuck y'all if you say anything to me about it. But Amy Goodman's face whenever Ta-Nehisi Coates' goofy ass be on the set, she look stars all in her eyes because he's pin game.
Because she believes Negroes are magical too.
I think she does. I feel like you guys have met her in some capacity, and she gave you guys that same starry eye.
I met her one time. I don't know if she believed I was magical, but I think she generally kind of.
Did you appear like John Coffey?
No, I mean, don't forget. Listen, let's be honest, right? On the left, and I think it's all fair to say that we are familiar with the left, the white, black, all the forms of the left. Like there is the kind of like Trotskyist trope, like black people are the vanguard of the revolution. Like there is a kind of ideological posture that some particularly, leftists, white leftists have that believe that, like black people are, storming the barricades ready for revolution. And my position is that it's not to say that black people aren't revolutionary. It's just like there are black people who are revolutionary and there are black people who are reactionary as hell. Just like there are white people who could be revolutionary and reactionary as hell. My position is that black people are human beings. And their humanity shouldn't be denied of them because people have these essentialized tropes of expectation in terms of what they should, can, or expect it to be, because it kind of fulfills this fetish obsession of they have of seeing, Negroes in afros and leather suits saying, fight, black power.
Yeah. No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And it's funny because when I start looking at voices on the left for black people, there's not a lot. I do read Black Agenda Report as much as I can. I do donate when I have a few bucks. But there's just I feel like there's 5 colored people that get ran through the leftist cycle, and I can't tell if cats are fighting for that spot or what, like that acceptance spot. Like I like a lot of the stuff Breonna Joy Gray says, but she's like queen bee for black female leftists right now. Like, God forbid somebody say something against her. Like, how do we? This whole show for me is sorry. I have notes. This whole show for me is my whole goal is I want to build a stronger left, and I definitely want to get black people up on things that we don't talk about that much. And
that's why right now.
Go ahead.
I became hip to your show through the episode you did with Cedric.
With Sid.
And I was saying, where's this guy been all my life in terms of this show, man? And I was dead sick because I was like, because I've been thinking about starting a podcast, and I was like, this guy is doing doing what I've always wanted to hear, is that a black left perspective that is not stuck in one of the t-shirts of the black left. When I mean the t-shirt, they're like, oh, I'm a revolutionary nationalist, pan-Africanist, anti-imperialist, socialist, Marxist, Leninist, queer feminist, maximalist, Maximilian quadruple. And I'm like, okay, you're in that t-shirt, you know what I'm saying? Or I'm the black Trotskyist. And I'm like, I've been writing from a black left perspective long enough to know all of the various ideological postulates that exist on the left. And very few of them realize how much all of that stuff turns off everybody who doesn't know anything about the left at all.
Thank you.
And not only that, many of them who are stuck in these ideological t-shirts were unwilling to understand, and I got a lot of heat from this from some of my comrades who might think that I'm not radical enough, why there was value to the Bernie Sanders movement, maybe not Sanders himself, opening an Overton window that I believe that we on the black left should have taken to reintroduce black people to their own tradition of radical politics. If we don't want to say radical, let's say anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-sexist, anti-racist, whatever phraseology you want to use, and anti-establishment politics. And sadly, I feel that the traditional black left, which is maybe the same five voices in the diner that you're talking about. I don't think that they took up that opportunity as effectively as they did. And it allowed people like Ta-Nehisi Coates, like Joy-Ann Reid, like other individuals to categorize left politics as a white, gentrifying trust fund thing that had nothing to do with black people, that I was enraged about because it totally neglected the fact that there's over a century history, documented scholarship and testimonial and otherwise, of black radical politics in this country that goes well beyond the Black Panther Party in 1966.
But brother, that's why I get you. And so, speaking of magical Negroes, look who just appeared.
But did we lose Touré for a second?
Yeah,
we did.
Motherfucker just disappeared. He just bloop bloop. You can't.
Well, you know why? You were talking all that smack about Amy Goodman. I want to get on her show one day, so I had to bounce.
You ain't never been on. I feel like you haven't been on Amy Goodman's show.
Never. But
am I mistaking you for another light skinned man that was on
somebody else? It was somebody else.
Damn, I totally said all y'all look alike. But I want to finish this point before you start. So you start talking. That's why I try to get y'all on the show, because there's certain voice, and I'll keep people's names out of it. There's certain people that didn't want to fuck with me because I didn't have a big enough following.
Right.
And for y'all to be like, yeah, I'll talk to you, goofy ass, that's fine. It meant a lot to me, and it means a lot to the people that do check this shit out. Because it is a first time for a lot of people to hear a lot of the stuff you guys are saying. And these perspectives for a lot of people, they're not getting. Because when I call this shit nuanced barbershop conversation, if us three were hanging out, and I believe three of us hang out, and we walked into a barbershop, because Touré would have to get a haircut.
Shots fired!
We'd be, because I'm bald as shit, we'd be having this conversation in the barbershop. Talking this same shit with people that probably don't normally have this conversation, breaking it down real plain so people could understand. And for me, that's how you build a stronger left. It's not trying to get in with some people because you think, well, I need to get in with them because they got a bigger base and and I get my Patreon and yada yada yada. And this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be the black dude with the dashiki and yada yada. Feel me?
No, I mean, listen, man.
I just want to say that's my way of saying thank you guys for coming.
I mean, listen, I think that, I mean, I came on the show and I became an instant fan of the show. Number one, because I feel that you're very good at what you do. I think that you have the perfect voice for your vocation when it comes to this show. Number one, and number two, right? It is so important for me to see Black spaces occupying a politics outside of the neoliberal corporate hegemony and introducing Black folks to politically economy-rooted politics that challenges the general function of the American political economy for Black folk and for everyone, that are not stuck in many of the ideological tropes of comrades who I love, who taught me, who are instrumental in teaching me, but who I feel their weddedness to those intellectual positions. Let's say revolutionary nationalism. Yeah. Let's say revolutionary nationalist Pan-Africanism, who may be ideologies that I don't particularly have problems with. But when I know that when you start dropping that hammer on the average layperson, Black or otherwise, who is totally alien to that discourse, and you're saying, like, you know, power to the people and the revolutionary must come now and this and that, they were like, revolution? It's like, you know, can I get some health care first? You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not saying that revolution is not important or is not valuable or doesn't have its place. But what I'm saying is that there are a large number of people, sadly, who have had no exposure to Black left politics, whether that's simply being a democratic socialist, whether that's being a Marxist-Leninist, whether that's being a revolutionary nationalist, whether that's being an anarchist, whether that's being whatever various manifestation, or just being a New Deal, a more left New Deal liberal, okay? The sad reality of the circular firing squad that also exists on the left of ideological purity helps facilitate the lack of ability of introducing people who basically say, yeah, why is it that income inequality has been getting worse for 40 years? My paycheck allows me to buy less. It costs me more to get health care, and it's too expensive for me to send my kid to college. Like, the person asking those questions is someone that we should be seeing as a natural audience for our politics. And what we seem to fail to realize is that most Americans are asking those questions right now. And it's not particularly necessary to hit them with Marx's 18th Brumaire as a response to get them to say, you know what, there is something wrong with status quo politics.
It's hard to do that, because my whole thing is, and this is why I have you brothers on, because you guys help me figure this shit out, right? I'm constantly trying to figure this shit out. When I go to my dad's house, who could be watching this show, and I love my dad a lot. He's an awesome man. Poor dude just had a mild stroke. He's okay. He's crazy as shit. He's got that picture on his wall of Bob Marley, Barack Obama, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King. And I walk in the I'm like, who the fuck? Them is just niggas. Like, why? And I'm trying to, because the moment I walk in the door, my dad wants to talk politics, which is funny. Like, you like, to your point, these people are upset about the way economically things have worked out, and I think it gets amplified even worse through the Trump microphone, because when you just, he's constantly on CNN or MSNBC, Trump is the bad guy that's making it even worse, and it's becoming even more real as he's finally retired, right? Like, how do you get certain messages across to cats that still see Barack Obama as in this pantheon of great black men next to Bob Marley? Like, how do you start without being a douche? Because I was on a show the other night with a young man, and he was just, Barack Obama's an ass and I hate him, he's this, is that. I was like, you know what, I get your point. I'm not a Barack Obama fan, but do you ever watch him speak? Have you ever listened to a Barack Obama speech? He speaks, it sounds like Chris Rock, he speaks real well. But as the presidents that we've had, think about the presidents that we had, and think about right before Barack Obama, you had Bush Jr. Wasn't the greatest orator. And then you shoehorn him with Trump. And maybe it's just because I'm looking at him through the lens of these just two shitty presidents. But I see why people love him. I watched that David Letterman interview with him. I get it. Of course you don't see the kids getting bombed. Of course you don't see the deportation in the cages. You can't. He's just so goddamn silky smooth with the pimp shit that he talks. So how do we penetrate that pimp shit and kind of show people, well, this was kind of the start of these problems?
Well, I think the first way, and I've written some pretty hard critiques of Obama, and I think the first thing you do, right, is that you engage in a project with people. And I talk to people. I have many friends like that. I said, ask them a simple question. Do you think it would be valuable to the people who govern American society to have communities that have been traditionally malserved by the politics of that society to be invested in supporting because of someone they feel they can empathize with, the same politics, if implemented by someone else, they would find problematic. Do you think that project could be valuable to people who don't have the best interest of your communities at heart? And I think that when you start approaching the Obama project in those kind of ways, and you start saying, well, let's talk basic facts. Do you know that Barack Obama received more Wall Street financing than any president in American history? Do you think that someone who's going to be interested in working class communities would normally be getting that kind of money if they didn't expect him to carry out a certain agenda? And I'm not saying you have to be malicious. Don't be remotely conspiratorial. And we shouldn't expect that everyone's going to get it, because a lot of them are going to reject it. But I think that if you just start in basic terms, the ones who generally are the people who are inclined to say there's something wrong with the system may get it. And there are some, a lot of my friends are successful career, professional, Black and brown folk who have, six-figure jobs. They're never going to get it because the system works for them. And they're not interested. Some of them might, but most of them have no interest in challenging it.
What are you going to say, Touré?
I was going to just amplify Pascal's last point, which is, I think one of the ways that we hamstring ourselves in connecting with, let's say, Black audiences is that those of us who are progressives fall into the trap of trying to connect with the Black vote, right? I mean, we tend to think of Black people ourselves as monolithic. Pascal and I don't, you don't, right? Cedric definitely doesn't. But anyway, that's the default, right? And I think the fact of the matter is, as Pascal alluded to, that there is, in fact, class heterogeneity among Black Americans. And for some, and it's a not insignificant number, a class-based politics that's going to benefit 80% of Black Americans, they're allergic to, because they're in the top 20% and they don't want to pay the taxes that will go along with that, right? Instead, what they want is federal coffers to come to them to trickle down to the masses. More Black entrepreneurialism, let's say, more CEOs who look like America. And what does that do for anybody who isn't the CEO? I mean, I think Pascal and I had versions of the same reaction to Obama going back to 2008, insofar as neither one of us were fans. So I know that was clear. Pascal maybe was a little less likely to find him charming than Jason or I. But for me, to whatever extent I found him charming, it was that I appreciate the talent, right? I mean, this is one of the ways I could appreciate Dr. Umar. I appreciate the talent of what he's doing, just as I can appreciate the talent of Rush Limbaugh, right? The content is not something that appealed to me, but I definitely appreciated, like Jason, how it is Obama resonated with people. But he resonated with people who, at least among Black folk, people who embraced the idea that we shared a common interest. I think a critical part of his post-racial game that's often overlooked, but chapter 4 of Toward Freedom is in part about this, is the central role played by underclass ideology in bridging the divide, interestingly enough, between what attracted white people to Obama's post-racialism and what attracted Black people to Obama's shtick. And what you would find is, particularly among petty bourgeois Blacks, but not exclusively, because these hood movies I brought us full circle. These hood movies sold Black Americans a somewhat sanitized version of underclass ideology. So most of us embraced that stuff. And it was a way for Obama to, oddly enough, demonstrate his cultural authenticity, not just to white listeners, who were happy that this Black man was willing to talk down to Black people, but around the globe, but also to Black listeners, right, who understood, right or wrong, that their cousin Pookie should not be eating Popeyes for breakfast, as Jason and I have talked about before. By the way, Jason,
Touré?
I have to. Oh, you can't hear me? No. I don't have to go. But I wanted to mention something to you. Since I don't like turkey, and we talked about Popeyes, I'm having Popeyes for Thanksgiving.
Just
Fried
remember
chicken.
the
Fried
only
chicken.
Popeyes buffet, Lafayette, Louisiana, the most magical place on earth.
There used to
Fuck
be a
Disneyland.
Popeyes buffet in New Orleans on Carrollton at Canal. It was one of the few that Copeland himself still owned. And I used to hit that spot with my cousin Kim, who Pascal is friends with, when just after I graduated. Damn right. I mean, I don't even know. I guess that I just didn't eat anything the rest of the day. Right?
How could you?
Right. I saved myself.
Oh man, I do some stereotypical shit, and eating at Popeyes is one of them. And do that shit with a motherfucking smile.
I feel that I'm glad we all feel comfortable in our blackness to outline how much we like fried chicken, man.
It's delicious. I'm sorry. Well, this is it's actually a dig at Obama. So
you should Popeyes is okay. I love it.
Folks.
I'm a big fan.
I shoot these threes. Fuck these hoes. I have to play this clip because I have to.
Oh, from the Boondocks.
I have to. Sorry.
Which season? Well, we'll find out.
I think this is season 1.
Okay.
Hey, man, she gonna be crying like this all the time? Because I say if she is, we kick her out.
Everybody, shush, shush. President Obama's talking.
My fellow
I know he's going to
Americans.
tell us what to do.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start off by thanking all of you out there who have called and written letters about the safety of the First Family. You'll be happy to know that Michelle, Sasha, Malia, myself, and Bo are all fine.
Don't nobody care about you, man. Tell us everything will be okay for us.
Everything is going to be okay. For us. We are currently in our very own super secret underground bunker with enough food and water and entertainment to last several lifetimes. But I'm here tonight to talk about you. In times of crisis, Americans pull together. And what's going to get us through this difficult time? Sharing.
Sharing?
Lending a helping hand to a neighbor in their hour of need.
No, neighbor. What we need is a cure.
Unfortunately, there is no cure for the pandemic we now face. But we do have an even more powerful weapon. Compassion for our fellow man.
No! Compassion for our fellow man.
In conclusion, I want to say that we are all in for some tough times ahead. And when I say we, I mean you. But Michelle, Sasha, Malia, myself, and Bo are going to be right here, rooting for you all the way. Good night, and God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
We all gonna die.
I had to play that clip because I was working on this piece. I do try to write, so you guys are also like my inspiration to try to string a few words together. And I watched a clip of Obama. It came up on my YouTube feed somehow. The algorithm was fucking with me. And it was a clip of Obama answering a question in 2016 when he was still president at a press conference. And it was an 11-minute answer. And watching him answer that question, he starts it off. I forget what the question was even about. And watching him answer the question, he's like, you guys know me. I got my start organizing in the streets. And he goes on to talk about gerrymandering. He goes on to talk about the Democratic Party's failures. He goes on to talk about voter suppression. And the way to solve it all, you got to vote. That was it. You can't talk about the state of the country if you're not involved. So you got to vote. And I was like, I was blown away by the answer, but the way he got there, I'm like, this is why cats love you, because you are pretty much what Aaron Sorkin just sits there and like, oh, and he writes all that bullshit about, because it's exactly what it sounded like. It sounded like just a West Wing threw up. And I'm like, this is why motherfuckers love you. And that a Boondocks clip to me it just encapsulates that, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna tell you. But it's satire, but he would always say it in such a nice way. You're fucked.
Well, I mean, listen, the Obama project was created in a Robert Rubin lab petri dish anyway. I mean, I'm I mean, I understand you guys giving kudos, but I've had it, man. This is a manufactured cat, man. Listen, I'm not going to give this cat that much love for his ability to manipulate people's emotions. I mean, this is a dude who has been in the Star Chamber for over 25 years. I mean, Touré's dad wrote about him in '96, like, alert, alert, black left. This is what we need to be aware of. This is what, literally talking about the guy as if there was a ruling class laboratory and they were putting, the cells together to manufacture this dude.
But he's dropping threes on these hoes.
Yeah, I'll be
like you should tell your dad that Touré be like, yeah, that's a great piece. It was very insightful. But you forgot that he was totally dropping threes on these hoes.
I mean, I probably won't relay that, but I think he'd appreciate it just the same.
Like, watching that clip of Barack Obama shoot that three, I was like,
I mean, I guess it's because for me, my favorite line about Obama is the fact that his whole first term cabinet was chosen by a Citibank executive.
Yeah.
So to me, like, the mythology is beyond gone. I'm not enticed. I mean, I do agree that he has certain political skills. There's certain raw talent. He's probably the most talented politician we've had in America going back, I would say, maybe to Kennedy. I think Reagan had certain talent, but I think Obama, because of his youth, he has certain gifts, not only personally, but the attractive wife, the two girls, the exotic background, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very politically marketable package that I would not deny. But I don't think it is, you don't have to be a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist to understand why, after the greatest evisceration of capital since 1929, the American ruling class realized to neutralize public discontent, you put a charming black family with this tall, attractive black man in the White House to have everyone cheer like we have overcome. I mean, it's perfect. It's like the master chess play.
But he's perfect to project a lot of shit on too. And Touré talks about that in Towards Freedom, where it's like, well, he's got a single parent household. It's like, but his single parent wasn't like my motherfucking single parent household. That shit was different as fuck. Motherfucker lived in Indonesia with his fucking, what did his stepdaddy do? He was something was it CIA?
Some State Department asset stuff.
and his regular daddy, he was like some kind of professor. Like, he didn't have
all Cold War State Department assets.
Like, his whole life was on some like next level super light skin shit. Like, I'm not having nobody I knew had that single mama life. Nobody.
Expensive Hawaiian prep schools.
Right.
Yeah. Motherfuckers act like Barack Obama and like, just because he listens to Jay-Z, like, that was like the thing. Like, oh, well, Barack Obama he's from the streets, but he's smart. To your point about fucking Ta-Nehisi Coates and the Harvard guy.
I'm gonna be very honest, right? I mean, I want us to be candid, right?
Candid.
It is such a transparent demonstration of how shallow a society we are, in my opinion, that Barack Obama is seen as exceptional. I've known vapid careerist Ivy League Negroes my whole life. They are a dime a dozen. I don't understand why people are so impressed with this cat.
If them cats you knew couldn't hit a turnaround jumper from the perimeter and bag a dime, and then have two kids with good hair, that's why. Good hair.
Well, I mean, again, if they had been in the pocket with people like, Michael Froman and Robert Rubin from like the time they were first year in law school, then maybe they would have had all those, and also played, basketball in high school and all that stuff. And,
And what
This
else?
This is a contrived cat. The cat is contrived.
Like all jokes aside, I'm gonna stop fucking with you.
Pop my collar, dust your shoulder.
That was when he won, right? Didn't he do this when he won?
The guy was born in 1961, right? He went to high school in Hawaii. He's not even culturally attenuated to hip hop. He's a disco guy. I mean, the fact that this dude is fronting like he's down with like hip hop from Hawaii, what were you listening to? Like, Run DMC Hits the Beach? I mean, come on, man.
But Pascal, to your point of him having a contrived persona, perhaps that's his genius. His genius is, and I think he discusses this in one of his first two memoirs, that he focused on, crafting this persona from a pretty early age, right? I mean, and I think a lot of Black Ivy Leaguers didn't anticipate that they could be president. So they didn't craft the persona that one needs to craft at a very early age, like he did.
Common and Kanye in the White House, man. Common and Kanye in the White House.
Having the Foreign Services agent white mom and or State Department related family might give him a little trajectory on being a ruling class pawn that most folks would not have. I get that,
right?
I understand.
It's funny because. It's funny because when we think back at the Obama years and we laugh, like I'm fucking with you. I'm fucking with you about 3-pointer. Like we laugh at this shit, and then it 8 years of that bullshit, right? And then you get 8 more. It's just a different kind of a lie. Donald Trump's born into wealth, crazy wealth, kind of been a habitual fuck up his whole life. But because he was on TV for 15 years in everybody's house, pretending to be, I think it was Anand Giridharadas that said Donald Trump is a poor man's version of what a rich man is.
With better hip hop on days than Obama.
Yeah. Right? Because Donald Trump used to hang with Russell Simmons.
And they were making hip hop songs about Donald Trump. They wasn't making no hip hop songs about Obama.
No, not really. That would not have been a hit that I can think of. But because again, he didn't do the wrong. He wasn't, dropping bombs like Vietnam, if you will, even though he was. No one ever associated that because we always associated him with this vision of Black excellence. And going back to those movies, it's so funny how I think it was Pascal when he was talking about the revolutionary Black guy who's revolutionary all the time, and I had a Menace II Society clip queued up of the one guy that was supposed to be like the woke friend. And he was in The Nation, and it was that's what woke was to me. I don't know if it was, I'm sure it was similar for you guys. In that era, woke was like the one friend that like read a final call and was like, yeah. Like, and then the one kid in Menace is like, he's constantly yelling at them guys to stop drinking and live, and the devil's got a plan and they're falling into the devil's plan, and no one wanted to fucking hear it.
I listened to a lot of KRS-One when I was in college. I understand. I get that. I know the whole. I mean, that in our era, right? The whole African medallions, reading Sheikh Anta Diop, the African origins of civilization, kind of like before Hoteps had all this kind of pejorative. Did you lose me?
Oh, yeah. Our host is frozen.
Oh, Jason is. That's a problem.
Yeah.
I guess he needs to get stuff together. He's the host, man. We can't afford to have him go.
No. Well, you could probably keep talking.
Well, the larger point I was going to make,
He'll be back.
was that you and I are old enough to remember where there was a kind of return to a kind of Black cultural nationalism that was being celebrated in hip hop and in some of the literature that a lot of folks were circulating at the time when we were kind of in our college kind of era, so I can identify with what he was talking about. But the thing is, though, right, you come to a certain point where you interrogate the politics of that, and you start to question what does that political project lead to eventually.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was retrograde when we were in college too, which was the first tell. I mean, it wasn't as retrograde then as it is now, but you know, more people should have interrogated it. But I think it dovetailed pretty seamlessly, or at least would, with Reaganism. And the Sister Soldier clip that Jason showed previously, I think, highlighted that. Bill Clinton's contempt for her notwithstanding, on some level, the case that she made. I just got a text from Jason. He has no idea what happened, but you know, as we talked about before, the case that she made was Bookerism, with the addendum that white people suck, right? So.
Right, exactly. And you know, part of when we're talking about exposing people, and not just Black people, but particularly Black people, to a kind of progressive or left politics, right, is that I think that, you know, coming from the tradition that you come from personally, intellectually, as well as your family, is that the understanding of Black political thought historically and the challenges of a project that complicates the nationalist narrative that has become so dominant and commonplace, particularly with millennial youth, unfortunately, through the proliferation of social media, and how, you know, challenging that politics and that worldview will get you deemed as, racially disloyal, so on and so forth. And when we realize that that's not the point of the project, the point of the project is to interrogate what is the logical conclusion of this kind of race reductionist politics in terms of what it produces, where it gets you, and why does it constantly get recycled as the only option that many Black people are presented as a way to solve their problems?
Well, you remember around the Million Man March, so it was October of 1995, Farrakhan had a moment of near respectability. And I remember watching the McLaughlin Group right after the Million Man March. And Eleanor Clift, who I think was the liberal on that show in that era, had given Farrakhan qualified praise. Now, again, it was greatly qualified because the anti-Semitism precluded actually celebrating him. But what she praised Farrakhan for and praised the march for was getting Black men, taking steps to get Black men to finally recognize that they bore responsibility for the problems that afflicted their own communities. And I used to watch the McLaughlin Group, obviously. It was on Sundays. I lived in New York, and I didn't have cable. So I watched what I could watch, and was always intrigued by the show, especially years earlier when Pat Buchanan was on, because that had a chilling, and even more chilling, he was a more chilling presence. But anyway, that was, I thought, quite the tell about, you know, the Million Man March and its resonance, but also a window onto the conservatism of the moment, because people had finally picked up, liberals had picked up on the fundamental conservatism of the NOI of that era, which was masked with, you know, the Bookerite elements of it, which, rather than simply focusing on the white people suck part and the anti-Semitism, right? And it, for a minute, I mean, some people imagined that if the NOI could shed itself of the white people suck part and the anti-Semitism, that it might have actually gained true legitimacy. But again, I mean, the basic point is that you could see from Farrakhan's sudden mainstreaming in that era, the ways in which this Black nationalist discourse actually dovetailed with Reaganism.
All right. Well, that was part one of what I thought was a very cool conversation with Touré Reed and Pascal Robert. We do get more in depth. I think I warned you at the beginning that there was technical difficulties on this show, and for whatever reason, my whole computer system just disconnected from the Wi-Fi. I have no idea why. There was nothing wrong with the Wi-Fi. Every other device in the house was still fine, but the computer disconnected, so we did another hour. That extra hour is available for patrons. So if you want to be a patron, there's the bonus hour of that, and there's a bunch of other bonus content from several of the shows, not all the shows, but several of the shows. And there's actually more patron-only content that we are creating constantly. You also get the shows earlier. You get them a day early. So I'll be having those gentlemen back on. We've been talking about having an end-of-the-year wrap-up and adding some people to the mix. Names have been thrown around like Touré's Pops Adolph, Mr. Adolph Reed. We've talked about getting Cedric back on, having another roundtable like this. Watching another movie, possibly Baby Boy. Maybe we should have a monthly John Singleton thing where we go and critique these movies, being filled with some right-wing tropes. But I think this conversation is extremely important, especially as we talk about things like the quote-unquote black vote. You know, who speaks for black people? Anyway, thank you guys for taking a listen to the show. If you want to hear part 2 in its entirety, which was a lot more loose and fun, then definitely go over to Patreon. If you haven't already done it, you can go to YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I believe the live stream in its entirety is on the YouTube channel as well. And that way you can see the clips. Those are some interesting clips. Watching Boyz n the Hood again, man, it's a whole different movie watching it with adult eyes. So thank you guys, and I will see you next time.